Good morning. At this time, I'd like to begin by saying the Pledge of Allegiance. If you'd rise and join me.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
First, I'd like to welcome everyone to this hearing of the House Labor and Industry Committee. I also need to remind everyone that the meeting is being recorded, and so I'd ask that all members and guests to please silence their cell phones and any other electronic devices. We call this hearing today to discuss House Bills 1170 and House Bill 716, sponsored by Representative McKenzie and Representative Galloway, respectively. These bills are focused on the verification of work authorization for workers in the construction industry and forming a multi-agency task force to review the misclassifications of employees as independent contractors. I have asked Representative McKenzie is going to be making some opening remarks, and is Representative Galloway... Okay, Representative Galloway's already joined us up here. I was going to ask him to join us up here as well. He's a former member of the committee. Correct. And former chair. So both of these gentlemen are going to join us as members, one officially and one as a kind of an honorary member for the day. So don't get carried away, Representative Galloway. There's no voting privileges today. All right. So at this time, I'm going to ask Representative McKenzie to begin by making a brief opening statement regarding his legislation.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate the opportunity to have the hearing on both House Bill 1170 and House Bill 716 today. I think they're both important issues. I support both pieces of legislation. I think they address some very serious issues that we face in our Commonwealth. And specifically, I'll talk about House Bill 1170. This piece of legislation, I think, does a number of things. I think the issues that we face with unauthorized workers across our Commonwealth hurt all of those across the industry, all the different stakeholders, whether it be employees, those that are directly being exploited and taken advantage of, or those other employees that maybe they're competing against for those jobs. Unauthorized labor drives down wages across the entire spectrum. And I think that's to a detriment to all of them. Also, we've heard anecdotally lots of instances where those unauthorized employees are being exploited or taken advantage of if they're injured on the job, for instance. Then what happens to them and the medical care that they receive. The other stakeholders that are adversely affected are other businesses that you're maybe competing against in a job situation. If you're using this type of labor, again, the lower wages corresponds to a lower bid price that you can bid. And then again, that's not fair for the legitimate businesses that are doing the right thing for their workers that are competing for those jobs as well. Finally, the final stakeholder that I'd like to address that's adversely impacted by the use of unauthorized employees is the government. We have lots of social safety nets, whether it be unemployment comp, workers' comp, et cetera, that are built on a foundation of everybody participating and everybody doing so fairly. And when that is not being adhered to, I think that directly impacts the government in a negative way as well. So again, hopefully this legislation will address and help all of those different stakeholders and improve the conditions for workers across the Commonwealth. So with that, Mr. Chairman, I'll conclude, but thank you again.
Thank you, Representative McKenzie. At this time, I'm going to ask Representative Galloway to briefly describe his legislation as well.
Mr. Chairman, if I could I speak on both pieces of legislation just briefly, please?
That'll be fine.
First of all, I'd like to applaud Representative McKenzie for bringing this bill up. 13 years ago, when I was first elected to the House of Representatives, I introduced two pieces of legislation. They both dealt with E-Verify. One was in the private construction industry, one was in the public construction industry. Both bills passed 6 years later in the Pennsylvania House of Representatives with strong bipartisan support, over 194 votes. One of them made it over to Senate, was picked up by Senator Kim Ward, and then eventually passed a couple weeks later. That had to deal with public works. E-Verify is the law of the land in Pennsylvania. For all public works construction, whether it's state-related, county-related, township-related, school district-related, authority-related. E-Verify is currently the law of the land, and it has worked spectacularly well. The problems that were brought up that we might encounter 6 years ago, we never did. The problems with the database were never realized. E-Verify is that rare government program that actually works. It is extremely effective. And again, this bill that Representative McKenzie is bringing up is the second part of that bill, which represents private construction. I think it's important to note at the end that E-Verify was something that was started under President Bill Clinton. It was strengthened under President George W. Bush. It was, for 8 years, the stated immigration policy of President Barack Obama. It is that rare occurrence in an issue that is one of the most divisive of our time. It is common ground. It is a place where both Democrats and Republicans, union and non-union, come together and say, that makes sense. It works. At the time, it was said we need an incremental approach, and that's what we did. We simply put it in the construction industry for public works. This is another incremental approach. It brings it in the private construction industry. And I think it's time. We can look at an individual word on an individual paragraph on an individual subsection in the back of this bill and say, I don't like it, and therefore toss the whole thing out. But that's not what this is about. And with that, I'd like to bring up my bill, which is misclassification. Now, these bills are similar. They deal with similar problems. Two different ways, two different issues, two different problems, but they are very similar. My bill deals with something called misclassification. Again, common ground. Misclassification is currently illegal in Pennsylvania. We passed a bill, I think it was 7 years ago. Now, when I became chairman of labor 4 years ago, the Democratic chairman of labor, Executive Director Haley Solari and I started working on a package of misclassification bills. It was brought to us by representatives of the Carpenters Union. And we started studying the issue, and we started looking at the problems of misclassification. Misclassification comes down to enforcement and penalties. The cause, the effect of misclassification is revenue. It could be fairness. You could look at this destruction of wages, the destruction of organized labor, destruction of the problem with wages in general, whether it's organized labor or non-organized labor. But when we're talking about revenue, we're not talking about a small number here. When we patterned our misclassification bills after New York, for example, which just implemented their misclassification bills, last year, New York realized almost $300 million in lost revenue. $300 million in unreported revenue. We have no idea of how much unreported revenue is happening in Pennsylvania. We can't put an exact number on it, but it is not an insignificant number. In the last 5 years, I have spent a tremendous amount of time traveling from one end of the state to the other. There isn't a labor hall in this state that I haven't been to or talked to. I have talked to union, non-union, builders, workers, contractors all over this state. I've asked them one question. What is your biggest problem? What is the biggest problem facing the construction industry in the state? Every single one of them said the same thing over and over and over. Union, non-union. It didn't matter. Misclassification has exploded in Pennsylvania. It has become a problem that is far too big for one department to take care of. So what we're going to do is look at what other states are doing. We're going to look at a comprehensive approach of spreading the responsibility among multiple layers of government. want to thank the chairman for bringing this bill up, and also the E-Verify bill, and thank this committee for allowing us to say a few words.
Thank you, Representative Galloway. Our first witness today is Jennifer Barrier, Deputy Secretary for Safety and Labor Management Relations with the Department of Labor and Industry. This department would head up the task force created under House Bill 716. We also invited the Office of the Attorney General to attend and testify, but they've indicated that they're not yet prepared to comment or offer testimony at this time. So we're looking forward to working with not only the Department of Labor and Industry, but also the Office of the Attorney General and other interested agencies and parties as well. We have allocated 15 minutes for this particular time slot. And so I'm going to start by asking Deputy Secretary Barrier to briefly address the committee and answer a few questions. Following that, this will allow the Secretary to get on the road to another engagement that she has down the road. Before we begin, I'd like to remind you to limit your opening remarks to 5 minutes, and then Shannon Walker, to my right, will signal you with a very annoying sound, as you just heard, when you have about 30 seconds remaining. Deputy Secretary Barrier.
Okay, thank you. Good afternoon, Chairman Cox, Chairman Harkins, Representative Galloway, and members of the House Labor and Industry Committee. I'm grateful for the opportunity to participate in this hearing to discuss House Bill 716. The Department of Labor and Industry is on the forefront of combating the harmful practice of employee misclassification and appreciates the General Assembly's initiatives to provide additional resources and tools. As you may know, misclassification occurs when employers wrongfully classify employees as independent contractors for financial gain. By purposefully misclassifying their employees, businesses not only dodge the responsibility to the federal, state, and local employment taxes, but also avoid providing fair wages, health benefits, and retire benefits to those employees. As a result of misclassification, the Commonwealth and local municipalities lose out on much-needed revenue, and hardworking employees and their families may be robbed of adequate income, benefits, and the assurance that they can access safety net programs should they become injured on the job or experience a layoff. Unlawful employers who misclassify employees independent contractors have an unfair advantage over law-abiding employers. These employers are not paying mandatory payroll taxes such as Social Security, Medicare, and unemployment insurance. They are also not paying workers' compensation premiums, health insurance, or overtime pay. With this unfair advantage, law-abiding employers are more easily underbid by dishonest firms and thrive in the Commonwealth. It is crucial for us to protect and reward employers who follow the rules and pay their fair share. L&I is affected by worker misclassification in 3 distinct practice areas: unemployment compensation, workers' compensation, and the Construction Workplace Misclassification Act, otherwise known as Act 72. For unemployment compensation, misclassification typically occurs through 2 avenues, or is discovered through 2 avenues. We first find out about it when a worker files for unemployment insurance benefits with L&I when a working relationship is terminated. The second is when our Office of Unemployment Compensation Tax Services performs a routine audit of an employer. In both instances, when an employer is found to have misclassified employees as independent contractors, the employer is required to pay retroactive contribution into the fund along with interest and penalties. Non-payment, while it could result in a lien against the employer's personal property, undoubtedly impacts the benefits trust fund. The Center for Workforce Information Analysis that is located within L&I reviewed a variety of sources in an attempt to understand the extent of employee misclassification in Pennsylvania. Utilizing federal and nationwide data, it estimated that 15% of employers may misclassify their employers as independent contractors. Based on the number of workers that are reported to unemployment compensation, this may equate to 275,000 workers. Moreover, under this scenario, the amount of tax revenue lost under unemployment compensation system alone could be $103 million annually. For workers' compensation, misclassification is discovered when a worker is injured while performing tasks for a business. The worker files a claim with our Bureau of Workers' Compensation, and that misclassification is discovered during the hearing process. A judge from our Workers' Compensation Office of Adjudication will issue a determination finding that the worker is an employee entitled to compensation for their injury. Workers in this situation are often forced to rely on the Commonwealth's Uninsured Employers Guarantee Fund, a fund that, as you all know, is currently coping with significant insolvency. According to information LNI has gathered, the top industries misclassifying employees as independent contractors are, number one, construction. After that, trucking, domestic services, food services, and administrative services. In 2010, this General Assembly recognized the significant problem of misclassification in the construction industry and attempted to curb this harmful practice by passing Act 72. This act sought to prohibit misclassification by establishing specific criteria for employers to use, that narrowly defines which workers could be defined as independent contractors. Do I still have time?
30 seconds.
Okay. So LNI, I should note that the, within the agency itself, within LNI, the Workers' Compensation System, the UC system, and also the Bureau of Labor Law Compliance, which enforces Act 72, we have formed our own intra-agency task force. But we also formed a task force with the Pittsburgh City Council and the Pittsburgh Building Trades last year. So, we do recognize the benefit of these task force, and we look forward to working with the General Assembly in attacking this problem. And I am happy to answer any questions.
All right. Thank you. I know it can be challenging sometimes to
get it within the
kind
time
of put
crunch,
everything
right?
in. We like to make sure we keep everything on time so the members can make their other meetings and so forth
Sure.
as scheduled. So I appreciate your testimony. I'm going to jump right in and ask if there are any members with any questions. Representative McKenzie.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to the Deputy Secretary for joining us. Just two quick questions. So, in general, what do you think could be improved upon in Act 72 that maybe we aren't currently doing? And that can be outside the bounds of House Bill 716, but just in general, are there things that internally as a department you've said, hey, we could improve upon Act 72?
Sure, yes. We've actually discussed this at great length, and I think some of the proposed remedies we've come up with is potentially general contractor liability for subcontractors' work, an increase in the penalties and fines that are listed under Act 72. We've also thrown around the idea of debarring contractors from performing work on public projects for Act 72 violations as well. And of course, the department, I think, would like to see greater enforcement authority so that, as of right now, there's no records keeping provisions. Like, the department actually has no legal authority under Act 72 to request records from a contractor. So that's something that we would like to see strengthened.
Okay. And, Mr. Chairman, for a second question, specifically to House Bill 716 would create a task force. You mentioned that you have some task forces
Yes.
going. So can you tell me your experience with those task forces and maybe how they differ from what's in the legislation?
So as far as what we have with the department, it's more of an information sharing, and we're getting into enforcement collaboration. So, before we were all kind of located in our little silos and, passing information amongst the different practice areas, wasn't happening as easily. But we now have monthly meetings, and we are engaging in better information sharing and also kind of narrowing down those cases where we could collaborate together in utilizing all of our resources and forces and trying to get the best bang for our buck essentially.
Okay, great. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative McKenzie. Representative Galloway.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. Real brief. I want to thank you for being here and thank you for bringing up the two problems. Representative McKenzie asked the right question, which is what can be done? What are the problems? And they have to do with enforcement and penalties. And I also want to thank, misclassification, it's not just this bill. There was a package of 4 bills. I want to thank Representative Snyder, Representative Mullery, who also have bills inside this package that address both of those issues, penalties and enforcement. And I want to thank you for bringing those two up. Thank you.
Thank you.
Representative Nelson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for your testimony today. It was interesting, personal experience in this area on a rooftop in Pittsburgh on a safety inspection where there were massive fall protection violations, and it was explained to me that we didn't, that OSHA didn't apply on this job site because everyone were independent contractors and there's an existing exemption. So I'm on this roof arguing with the guys as they're throwing the tin down, and I get on the phone and I call OSHA and say, hey, this is the structure of the job site. Everybody is an independent contractor, and they're saying that so no safety standards apply because each person is individually exempt. And the OSHA inspector said, yeah, you're right. So this, you touched on the workers' comp consequence if one of those individuals fall and are crippled. This circles back all the way to the days when workers would be dumped on their porch and they'd get the next oldest to the house, and it also affects those same individuals on unemployment as well, because particularly in the construction trades, these people may not have a choice but to work under those conditions. So I applaud the efforts of both representatives, and thank you for your testimony.
Thank you.
And Chairman Harkins.
Thank you for your testimony. Just a question on how much has the department collected in Act 72 violations?
Yes, so this year actually was a banner record collection year for us. We collected over $550,000 in fines under Act 72, and that's against 200 employers, 200 contractors. Thanks.
All right, are there any other questions? Representative McKenzie.
Just to follow up to that, Mr. Chairman, where does that funding, those fines and fees that are collected, where do they go, or how are they accessed by the department then?
Sure, actually, they're divided to go back to the Unemployment Compensation Fund and the Workers' Compensation Fund. So,
great, thank you.
Thanks.
Any other questions from the members? Well, Secretary Barrier, if you have additional comments, we do have a couple of minutes remaining in the window that we had allotted. I don't want to put you on the spot, but if you have additional things you'd like to highlight before you go, we'd appreciate that.
Actually, I just want to thank this committee for recognizing this problem and inviting us to testify. It's a very important issue, and we need all the assistance we can get. So, thank you for hearing us today.
All right. Well, thank you, and safe travels.
Thank you.
Now we're going to hear from our stakeholder panel. We've invited 2 representatives of trade unions and 2 representatives of the construction industry to join us today. We'd like them to share their thoughts on the legislation that's before us. So with us today, we have Thomas Breslin, who is the Regional Area Manager with KML Regional Council of Carpenters. We have Michael Ford, Area Marketing Representative, Sheet Metal Workers Union Local Union number 19. John O'Brien, General Contractors Association of Pennsylvania, and Hank Butler, Executive Director, PA Council of General Contractors. Okay. Again, I'd like to remind everyone to try to limit your opening remarks to 5 minutes. Shannon Walker, I won't ask her to use her phone to make the noise again, but she will signal you when you have 30 seconds remaining in your 5 allotted minutes. Again, I'd like to thank all of you for being here, taking the time out of your day to join us, and we'll start with Mr. Breslin.
Representative Cox and Representative Harkins, members of the Labor Industry Committee, my name is Tom Breslin. I come before you as a representative of the Keystone Mountain Lakes Regional Council of Carpenters. On behalf of our 20,000 plus members in Pennsylvania, I'm pleased to be here today and appreciate the opportunity to offer input into two issues vital to our membership. First, for the record, our union is the largest construction trade union in Pennsylvania, representing both skilled tradespersons and apprentices. We applaud the committee for elevating e-verification and misclassification for public discussion, and furthermore, applaud the committee for considering these two issues simultaneously, for there is a great synergy between the two. We support the efforts being made to advance both e-verification and misclassification legislation, and look forward to working with the sponsors, Representative McKenzie and Representative Galloway, and the entire committee in reaching a final product. The presence of fraud in the construction industry is a major issue. Estimates suggest that state and local budgets are being shortchanged hundreds of millions of dollars in tax revenue that are not being collected. Allow me to be clear, this is not an issue between contractors who are associated with unions and those who are not. This is an issue between honest employers who pay their taxes and meet legal obligations and those who do not, thus creating an unfair competitive advantage for those who choose to cheat the system. In addition, many of those incorrectly being classified as independent contractors are not legally authorized to work in the United States. The Carpenter Union casts no judgment towards these individuals and recognize that they are very much being exploited by unscrupulous contractors and labor brokers. But the fact remains that people not legally eligible to work in the United States are taking work opportunities away from those who are eligible. Expansion of the federal and state e-verification program would help that it would hold all contractors in the construction field accountable for ensuring that their employees are entitled to work in this great country. But like all well-meaning efforts, the results are only good as the oversight and the enforcement that takes place. Any final product must provide adequate resources for enforcement and penalties sufficient enough to serve as the deterrent to fraudulent and illegal action. We are equally supportive of advancing legislation to create a misclassification task force. It is our view that such a task force would be more appropriately entitled Tax Fraud Task Force. For the existence, some are confused over what misclassification really is. Some may believe that misclassification is about paying an individual as a laborer, hypothetically, when they are in fact a carpenter or electrician. Misclassification is about calling someone an independent contractor when in fact those individuals do not in any way meet the definition. This practice allows contractors to avoid paying required federal and state taxes, as well as not paying unemployment, workers' comp, or liability insurance. This could all add up to a 40% advantage over an honest contractor. By skimping out on these obligations, contractors create an uncompetitive business environment that impacts all honest employers and their workers. This practice can make an honest contractor into a dishonest contractor just to be able to compete. Ladies and gentlemen, this is called fraud. Nothing more, nothing less. If a contractor and their employees paid their fair share of taxes, Pennsylvania and the federal government could have more revenue to take care of their veterans, rebuild their infrastructures, schools, hire more police, firefighters, or teachers, and even pay down the state debt that this Commonwealth is in dire need of. Approximately a decade ago, a law, Act 72, was enacted in Pennsylvania that defined independent contractors. To many, including my union, enforcement of the law and the penalties attached have not proven effective in combating this practice. Establishing a misclassification task force will bring focus and coordination of resources to combat this illegal activity not seen here before. Thank you for the opportunity to speak before the committee, and we look forward to working with you to move this forward. Tom Breslin, Regional Manager of the Keystone Mountain Lakes Regional Council of Carpenters.
Thank you, Mr. Breslin. Next, we'll hear from Mr. Ford.
Thank you, Chairman Cox and Chairman Harkins. My name is Michael Ford, and I am a representative from the Sheet Metal Workers Union, local number 19. I'm also here on behalf of the 125,000 construction, highly trained and active journey persons and apprentices we have through the Pennsylvania State Building and Construction Trades. These two bills are interconnected in a lot of ways. What it does is it allows the exploitation and theft of wages from unscrupulous employers against people that are really being taken advantage of. My brothers and sisters in the labor movement go on job sites every day, and we run into this where everyone is a a subcontractor to themselves, which is untrue. We're really happy to be here just to have the opportunity to speak on behalf of this, and I'm excited that this is something that everyone's going after because it's a huge issue for everyone, and I'm just happy to be part of it. And I apologize ahead of time. I just kind of got thrown into this Friday afternoon, so I would have had a little more. I would have been a little more prepared, but anyway, we're here 100%. We have the backing of all of our members to do the right thing, and we're here to fight for the right thing.
All right, and I do want to thank you again for stepping in at a late notice.
Yeah.
I know there was a death in the family of the individual who was originally scheduled to testify, so we appreciate you filling those shoes and stepping up to the plate.
In all fairness, he probably would have been way cooler than me, but it's okay. At least I'm here.
We'll have to take your word for that one at this point.
Okay, thanks.
All right, at this point, we'll hear from Mr. O'Brien.
Yes. Hello. Thank you, Chairman Cox, Chairman Harkins, for having me today, and thank you to the members of the committee, Labor and Industry Committee. My name is John O'Brien. Today I'm here on behalf of GCAP, General Contractors Association of Pennsylvania. GCAP is a collection of construction associations based throughout Pennsylvania. Out in Pittsburgh, we have Master Builders Association. Central PA, we have Keystone Contractors Association. In the eastern part, we have GBCA, General Building Contractors Association. And within the next week or so, we're adding up in Scranton, NEPCA, Northeast Contractors Association. So you add it up, and collectively, I'm sitting here representing over 700 management companies. And you know, these are 700 companies that follow the rules, play by the laws that you guys give us, pay our taxes, hire the right people, and these are 700 companies that are losing market share for, you know, tax fraud companies, companies that are cheating the system, skirting the tax system, and these are honest, hardworking Pennsylvanians that are losing out on jobs. Much of my testimony that you see is kind of mirrors Tom Breslin's. Tom and the KMO Carpenters have really taken a leadership role on this. And, you know, at the time, probably 10 years ago or so, when this was first introduced to me, I thought it was just kind of a minor issue. I didn't realize till working closer with KML, like, how serious this is. And, you know, there's facts and figures that are out there, like 15% of the market share in southwestern PA is losing out on carpentry work. And if you add that up, that's thousands of jobs, you know, that are going illegally, you know, through the system. And these ghost workers are picking up work that our members are not participating in. So I don't want to take up too much time of the committee. I just want to let you know management is right inside with our labor friends, and this is a serious issue, and we're here to help. Thank you, Rep. Galloway, for your legislation, and Rep. McKenzie for yours. E-Verify is a great system. It's easy for anyone to say they have issues with it. It's really head-scratching. It's just a simple process. A lot of our contractors have to do it for the public sector, and because it's so easy, they do it for all new hires. So whether they work in the public or not, it's a no-brainer. And as far as the task force, that's a great idea. Under Act 72, there was a lot of calls, a lot of issues, a lot of attention drawn to the issue, but there doesn't seem to be a lot of action. So I think maybe it's time to go back to the drawing board and get the task force up and running and decide what else can we do on this issue. And on behalf of GCAP, I'm willing to work with the committee and help push this legislation through. Thanks for having me.
All right, thank you. And last we'll hear from Mr. Butler.
Okay, today, with this hat on,
There you go.
with this hat on, my name is Hank Butler. I am the Executive Director of the Pennsylvania Council of General Contractors. Pennsylvania Council of General Contractors is an organization developed of large general contractors, separate from his organization, but mainly made up of some of the larger ones around the state. I will read through the testimony that you have. We're starting the clock, right? Okay. Thanks. Okay. I do talk. Believe me, I no problem, and I know where that's coming from. I do talk fast, so please follow along. Thank you, Chairman Cox, Chairman Harkins, members of the Pennsylvania House of Representatives Labor and Industry Committee, for the opportunity to speak with you today regarding House Bill 1170 and 716. Pennsylvania Council of General Contractors believes in the principles of fair, efficient, competitive construction, bidding, awarding, and building To accurately convey our thoughts on these two bills, I wish to look at each one separately. E-Verify, House Bill 1170. The Penn CGC would like to thank Representative McKenzie for utilizing Act 127 of 2012, using E-Verify for public work projects as the basis for this legislation. Act 127 was negotiated and agreed to through the entire stakeholder process. As the Penn CGC worked through Act 127 of 2012, we had two main objectives. Number one was to assure that general contractors are not forced to be Homeland Security experts in their day-to-day operation, and number two, to assure that E-Verify efforts cannot be used for political gain while hindering the law-abiding general contractors. Act 127 of 2012 accomplished these efforts and have a strong good faith language and moves the burden of proof for intentional violations to the construction companies to the courts. As we reviewed House Bill 1170, we had several questions that just came up. Number one, we believe that House Bill 1170 unfairly targets construction companies who have their own employees. If this legislation is designed to address the entire construction community, then it should also include professional employment agencies and unions who allocate workers to construction sites. Number two, does House Bill 1170 enable the contracting agency to terminate a contract of a subcontractor in violation of E-Verify on work sites? Number three, House Bill 1170 is not clear as to the liability regarding a general contractor who hires a subcontractor in violation of E-Verification, hiring undocumented workers. Sorry. A general contractor who hires a subcontractor in violation of 1170 should not be held responsible. Lastly, House Bill 1170 has penalties for first-time violators of the E-Verify system. Since most, if not all, construction companies, employment agencies, and unions are not Homeland Security experts, the first offense should be a warning and a learning experience to assure that this action does not happen again. The second offense should be a disciplinary action. The Pennsylvania Council of General Contractors does not support the use of undocumented workers to win work in our state but any legislation should be written to not hinder those companies, employment agencies, or unions who follow the laws of our state and nation. House Bill 1170 is a strong start towards creating a statewide E-Verification system, but several issues need to be addressed so it is once again a successful stakeholder compromise as what Act 127 was, focusing on the public sector. We'd like to continue working with Representative McKenzie and the committee to create a strong stakeholder supportive effort. Moving on to misclassification. It seems that House Bill 7, I'm good with time? We're good with time? Okay, good. It seems that, I have to give it, I'm sorry, I had to. It seems that House Bill 716 is a study to assess Act 70 of 2010, addressing independent contractor issue in Pennsylvania. Once again, the Pennsylvania Council of General Contractors does not support the use of independent contractors or misclassifying workers to win work on construction projects, but any legislation should be written to not hinder those companies who follow the laws of our state and nation. As Penn CGC reviewed House Bill 716, we just have several questions. One, is the legislation focusing on independent contractor issue or the misclassification of worker issue? These are different issues and the definition should be clearly defined. Does this legislation focus on private work or does it also include public work which incorporates prevailing wage law? Number three, why does this legislation have a task force of 1 elected official and 6 appointed officials? Attorney General, Secretaries of DCED, DEP, General Services, Budget, Labor and Industry, and Revenue. Number one, why is DEP included? But number two, why are there no experts in the construction industry? General contractors, specialty contractors, unions, individuals, employees, to be included in this task force for their insight and expertise. Lastly, as one reads the March 1st Construction Workplace Misclassification Act report, there seems to be a predominant number of small contractors, restoration, home builders, drywallers, et cetera. Should this legislation and subsequent discussions of the task force hinder all contractors, some of whom work within the laws of our state and nation? The Penn CGC does not support using independent contractors or misclassifying workers to win work, but at the same time, we need to protect the contractors who multitask on their respective work sites. Contractors and employees who choose not to be signatory to a collective bargaining agreement are sometimes penalized because of their multitasking abilities to work on construction sites. In collective bargaining work, the work rules between the different trades are clearly defined between themselves. The workers only work on the regulated tasks. For contractors and employees who are not subjected to these regulated work rules, the interpretation becomes unclear, especially with the enforcement. For example, do you pay an electrician's rate to move wiring on a construction site or a labor's rate? When moving roofing shingles, who pays the roofers, a roofer's rate or a labor's rate? On a private job, not prevailing wage, it does not work attempting to fit a union work rules into an organization that does not need to require such restrictive guidelines. Any effort of this task force would need to respect the rules set forth by each respective entity, those who are signatory and not signatory to a collective bargaining unit. As stated before, the Pennsylvania Council of General Contractors does not support the use of independent contractors or misclassifying workers to win work on construction projects, but any legislation should be written to not hinder those companies who follow our laws. With that, it's really?
So
okay.
yes.
I know. I know. I even talk slow. I know. Gosh. With that, it is important to have an Act 72 of 2010 task force defining either an independent contractor or misclassification of worker to include stakeholders and experts in the construction community to help the task force, politicians, and appointed officials understand and comprehend the entire construction climate before them. Moving forward, I wish to work with Representative Galloway and members of the committee to help move this in a strong direction. That's, I hit it? Okay.
Fantastic. You can relax now. All right. I again wish to thank all of you for your testimony. At this time, we'll go ahead and start with questions from the members. We're going to start with Representative Nielsen.
Relax is over. Yeah, thank you, gentlemen, for your testimony. And I want to be clear on the record, Mr. Chairman, that this is not a union or non-union bill. This is to protect the workers of Pennsylvania. As an electrician by trade, and my time at the Department of Labor and Industry, firsthand, we've seen this. When I go into work, I'm an electrician. Whether I move a spool of wire, whether I pull a wire, every aspect of that job. I'm not a laborer for a day, an hour of that day. I'm an electrician for the entire day. And every job duty, every aspect of that job is as an electrician. And I just thought it'd be clear to put that on the record to make certain, because what we found when I was with the department in 2003 to 2007 was people were coming into work and they were an electrician for an hour. Next, they were a plumber. Next, they were a sheet metal worker. Next, they were a laborer. Next, they were a carpenter. They would split these days up and say, look, we're going to do you this way, this way. We don't have to follow the law per se. So today, as a co-sponsor of both these pieces, I just wanted to go on the record of saying, you know, an electrician is an electrician, a laborer is a laborer, carpenter is a carpenter, sheet metal worker is a sheet metal worker. I'm glad the contractors support it. Quick question, John, how many contractors do you represent across the Commonwealth and employees numbers?
Over 700 construction companies.
700 companies?
Over 700
do we know
construction
how many employees
companies.
about?
Trying to figure that out. That's a tough one. So,
Hank, same thing, please.
Yes, sir. We represent, ours is focused, small. We represent 14 general contractors, solely general contractors. Employments are about 2,000 employees each.
Right.
So we predominantly look at those large, more sophisticated, which quite frankly is why these rules, like the E-Verify, we've been using the E-Verify system because all of our contractors do public work, and they work it out fine. And the way we negotiated this was great. We negotiated this bill back when it was in 2012 to basically say in a pre-employment paperwork, as long as you do the E-Verify, print it out, put it in the personnel file, you're exempt from prosecution. You've done your job. So if someone finds a undocumented worker that the E-Verify kicks out as an error, it's not the responsibility of the GC. Of course, the person will be taken care of, but again, they're not liable in that sense. When it comes to, and I do agree, when it comes to even misclassification of employees, like I've said, or even in that area, the LNI has made tremendous strides.
Correct.
But understand, before your time at LNI, there were reports on prevailing wage work of a laborer does laborer's work. That's all it would say. So, and when the enforcement officer would come in, they would base it on a union contract that was not accessible to those not signatory to a collective bargaining agreement. So it was open to interpretation. Now we've come a long way.
Even
It's now
interpretation
listed.
at that time, Hank, the CBA was the prevailing wage of that, and that CBA, which is a collective bargaining agreement, is online. It's actually online
Well, back
and
then,
posted.
but understand.
But
back
I
then
know
it was
back
not
then we
public.
weren't.
We weren't. Now we are. Now we are. So we're making progress.
So I'm hoping that you can swing around and support
Oh,
this.
If the testimony is very clear, we are not opposed to having the task force, but we would like to have some experts in the task force from the construction community to add their insight, because we don't, having all appointed officials or a politician does not give it as much, in my opinion, credibility as it could have with experts from the union halls, from the union contractors, from our group, from employees.
Well, I'll give my word here today. I'll work with the sponsors of the bill and talk to them about doing it same as we did with the apprentice training committees and stuff like that, and have a wide range and the expertise on it. And thank you, gentlemen, for your testimony today. Thank you, Chairman.
That was it for you? Really? You couldn't go harder?
Leave well enough alone.
Hank, you can
you've
see
got it
him.
good.
He'll start playing with his pen a little bit. Okay, that's why I sit behind the chairman. As soon as that pen starts going, I know my time is up.
You're learning well. All right, Representative McKenzie.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to all of our testifiers. Mr. O'Brien mentioned that he has experience working with the E-Verifying system already on public works projects. If you can expand on that, certainly. You mentioned that you had no problems. Has anybody else utilized the system? Are there any challenges or problems that we should be aware of when potentially looking at the expansion of its use?
Yeah, a lot of our members got exposed to the system during the federal Stimulus Act of 2009, I believe. If you get federal stimulus money, you had to, use E-Verify for your employees. So construction companies that worked for University of Pittsburgh, I believe Penn State, Temple, the state-affiliated universities, when they were getting this federal money, they had to use E-Verify. And just like anything new in life, you kind of question it at first. You're like, what's this all about, And then the contractors started using it, and it's like, whoa, this is really easy. Can't believe I had hesitation to use this system. Yeah, so no real concerns, no issues at all. I guess a minor concern, but this is not at the state level. I told you this last week over the phone. If there's a contractor like pouring concrete one day, the cement mason might work for 2 days for this contractor, and then later in the week he's working for this contractor. It doesn't follow him. The E-Verify doesn't follow him from company to company. So it's just an extra couple minutes. The HR department has to put that same employee through E-Verify again when they start working for the company.
Representative McKenzie, we deal with this issue a lot through the trades. A lot of the end users are requiring our contractors to have E-Verification. Is this on? Now is it on? It's on. Green light's on. Okay. We deal with this a lot in the trades. What we're seeing now in the industry is a lot of the end users, the clients for our contractors, are asking for E-Verification of the employees on the job sites. A lot of our members go through TWIC, which is Transportation Identification backgrounds to work in refineries or anywhere where you pull into ports. The I-9 forms are being utilized throughout the industry. So we applaud you, like I said, taking it to the next level. Yes, prevailing rate is one thing on public works, but there's a majority of private work out there that overwhelms the public works. So, bringing it into the construction industry overall, it will help out a lot. This is a revenue issue. That's really what both of these bills are revenues. It's generating revenues for the economy of Pennsylvania and the municipalities and the townships or whatever it may be. That's what these are all about, is revenue. And as you've heard today, there's a lot of testimony saying about how much is being lost. The task force, and I've been involved, I've been a rep for 20 plus years. I've dealt with the labor and industry for basically the past 20 plus years. But the task force of just having some interactive dialogue doesn't help. And there's a lot of different issues out there or case studies that's been done. But up in New York, and it was mentioned earlier, 2015, they did a study, the governor did a study up there. They identified 26,000 employees were being misclassified, discovered over $316 million of unreported wages. They also discovered that 1,800 fraudulent investigations discovered $264 million of unreported wages, and nearly $7.2 million in unemployment insurance contributions was due on that. We're talking some serious numbers here. And like I said earlier, the deficit for the state or any other little municipality that's out there, this could put back into our schools, infrastructures, and everything else like that. So it's a revenue bill. It's not a union bill. It's not a non-union bill. It's a revenue bill.
And if I can, Mr. Chairman?
Oh, sure you can. I can't.
Go ahead, Representative McKenzie.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So just to follow up, Mr. Breslin, so you're saying that the end users are oftentimes requiring this type of check already. So where in the process is it being done? Are you doing it, or is the end user doing it? Where is it occurring currently in practice?
So basically, as we know, it's an employer type, issue that they have to address it and do this and keep the paperwork and everything. But it's nothing that the trades do themselves, I can say that. As was spoken earlier about the GCs being penalized, any employer should be doing this. So it's on the employer end, but the end users or the clients for our contractors are requiring that the employee or their employees being on those job sites have that background check done.
Okay, gotcha. So they notify you that that they're going to be doing it, or you're just aware that they're going to be doing it. So then you're not even supplying somebody that you think might not be eligible to pass, because you would have a problem then with that.
Oh, yeah.
That end user. So you're kind of, it's kind of working its way back through the system. They're the ones doing the actual check, but then again, that kind of flows downstream or upstream to you guys, and kind of you're making the adjustments there.
Well, it's not even adjustments. As I said, the employers are the ones that are or the end users requiring the contractors to do this with our members. So we're not doing it up front. Actually, the employer is doing the e-verification and keeping those records.
Okay.
Okay.
Sounds good. Thank you.
Yeah, so if I may, so the owner, construction client, will put it in the bid docs. All employees must go through e-verify. And then when we get someone from the hall, the employer, the contractor, subcontractor, or what have you, they'll put the person through e-verify for all new hires.
Great. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Representative McKenzie. Representative Cephas.
Thank you, Chairman. Just to follow up on Rep. McKenzie's question, so if the constructor, the contractor, identifies someone that doesn't pass the e-verification, does that get communicated back to the hall? And if so, in your practice and experience, have you guys done anything with the employee or the union member that doesn't pass the verification?
The unions are not ICE or immigration enforcement. So basically, like I said, if it is brought back to us, there's really not much that we can enforce that. I mean, as I said, we represent over 20,000 plus members in Pennsylvania and over 44,000 members in 7 states. So for us to keep track of that is really not the employer or that end user. That employer will keep it in his records that he will not hire that employee again.
Okay.
So, it's really the employer's policing it based off the guidelines of the law. But then, the employee, if he is, we're not here to protect the guilty either.
Got it. And just as an additional question, so in your experience with this system, what is the associated cost to maintain and run this system as well as to get it started up? And does that differ from larger contractors versus small contractors?
No cost. It's a free service.
Okay.
I'm sorry. I mean, the only cost associated with it is someone in your human resources department has to go through this. So obviously, the larger contractors will hire more people, so they'll spend more time. But they're not hiring, 20, 30 people a day. This is over time every time you hire someone new.
Okay.
So it's just slowly over time, the time adds up.
And this is just added to the packet for your W-4 and everything else. It's just another, documentation that's in there. It just needs that you need to verify by ID. Certain IDs are accepted to that, that you checked off those boxes are correct.
The bill in 2012, the act that was passed, we basically was set up in a way to allow that good faith effort to happen. So we basically just told all the employees in your new hire orientation packet, just run the social security number, you get the document that they are fine, put it in your personnel file, and you're exempt. I mean, and so then if there is ever a audit, you've complied with the law. And that was the concern, quite frankly, that we didn't want different interpretations happening and people having problems. This way, it's on the GC, it's on the contractor, subcontractor. As long as they follow the law, it's fine.
Okay. And last question, just since you've been using the system, How many individuals have you flagged that aren't, verified?
I don't personally use the system, or construction companies.
I mean,
use it.
based on the construction companies that you represent.
Yeah, but there's numerous issues about there might be a typo in the information they're submitting. You'll get a notice. The employer will get a notice saying that they have flagged this person. I think you have 72 hours to respond to the notification. A lot of times, 9 times out of 10, they typed in the wrong info, so they just retype it, and it's fine then after that.
And Representative Cephas, our next group will be able to handle that a little more in detail. We asked them here, seeing that questions like that would probably come up, so you'll definitely want to stick around for our next portion. All right, next we have Representative Nelson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank each of you for your testimony. As I had shared earlier, I'm a strong supporter of both these bills, and I too want to achieve balance through this legislation. It really seems that we want our good employers that are doing it right not to be penalized by getting undermined or under the table workers or workers that may not pass that e-verification process. But you had mentioned subs or subs of subs that could be using temp agencies, and if you could touch on 2 parts of that. One, do we address or include those temp agency elements or those subs of subs? And 2, to prevent a person who signs up as an independent contractor and is getting maybe a little bit more money and then has an injury and gets hurt on a job and now says, well, really, I'm an employee because of X, Y, Z. So I don't think that really happens on the trade side as much, because that's pretty established environment. But in the non-trade construction, where you might have a subcontractor, framing contractor, go job to job to job that they may try to flip after an injury or a fall and suddenly say that they're an employee when they've been being paid. Do we have balance there from your perspective?
Yeah, I'll touch on the E-Verify, and then we'll take it from there. So for E-Verify, you're only using it for your employees. So our members are some of the larger GCs build the tall, PNC Tower or stadiums in Philadelphia. The GC, the general contractor, might have 50, 60, 75 subs working for them. The GC is not verifying every single employee on the job site. They're just verifying their own workforce, their own superintendents and workers that they give a paycheck to, only their people. And then the subs and the subs, they are E-verifying their own people. So hopefully
is there an accountability, because a GC could hire to this point and then they're subbing out to people that does the GC have an obligation to ensure that those...
We want to make sure they don't. I personally don't believe they should be liable. If they're going to hire a subcontractor, it should be the responsibility of the subcontractor, and in my opinion, the liability should stop at a subcontractor, which is why I think there should be legislation to allow a GC, if a sub or even a sub to a sub-sub, to terminate their contract if they are in violation of the E-Verify. Or even, well, as we can discuss later on, even the misclassification or the independent contractor issue. We have seen in
touch on that. So if I'm a 4-tier deep subcontractor that may be pulling from day labor, and I'm not, and it's determined I'm not using E-Verify, you're wanting the opportunity to be able to terminate that contract?
Yes.
Is that what you're saying?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay. And what are your thoughts on that, sir?
They're breaking the law.
Yeah.
It should have. Yeah, it will be in the specs in the contract that you sign with the subs. It will be written in there that they have to follow this.
Okay.
This was a concern I had even back in 2012 with the E-Verify before about professional employers and union halls. Some of my contractors have been they call double-breasted, where they have union shops and they have non-union shops. And in these cases, or in some cases, they'll call from the union hall and union hall will come in, or in some cases, in more rural areas, they'll call from a professional labor ready or what have you to have some people come in to work for them. There should be some information, or my personal opinion is they should be able to have the security that if they're going to get a person for one day or a couple of days, they should already have the E-Verify done, and the liability should stand with that person who is supplying the workforce to the employer. That's just again, I've been on that statement for, 7 years now on this.
That was the second part, to ensure a worker doesn't flip afterwards. So they start as an I-9, then something goes wrong, and they say, wait a minute, I'm really an employee.
Right.
Are there balances in there now to protect from that, from your assessment?
No. I mean, regarding the independent contractor, I mean, that should be, right now, no. I mean, if they, again, we're dealing with two different issues here. With regarding the E-Verify, the liability a general contractor, even a subcontractor, should not be liable if they hired outside, it's just my opinion, outside of their organization and they're being given a person in violation. If they're hiring, it should be the responsibility of that group that is supplying the workforce. That's just, again, that's where I've been saying that for years. When it comes to independent contractor, we talk independent contractor, which is a third-party person coming in, or a misclassification, which is why we think the definition should be more directed on what exactly that is. Because there was a case, and you brought up a roofer earlier. There was a case years ago when I was at a different organization where there was a roofer who was threatened for debarment on a prevailing wage job. It was a school, and it just said labor performs labor's work. So what he did, just not knowing the rules, classified a labor rate to go from the stockpile to build materials up to the roof. Well, the department came in and said, and don't worry, it wasn't you, it was before you. What it said was, that's not right. It should be a roofer's rate from the bottom of the building to the top. Therefore, you're debarred. And the poor guy was almost in tears because he was going to lose his business, but it wasn't, he just didn't know the rules, or he would have paid it accordingly. So it wasn't intentional by any means. It was just, he just did not know. He was misclassifying workers because he didn't know the rules. And that's really all it is.
Mr. Breslin, you had some additional comments on that?
Yeah, there's a couple things here. First of all, it is legal to be an independent contractor, okay? As long as you meet the requirements that are there, that you have control of your business, gain and loss. There's steps that are there that you can actually be an independent contractor. What's going on in the construction industry is that there's a lot of people being labeled that don't meet those requirements. So to get to your question about, if someone all of a sudden is an independent contractor, gets hurt, now they want to be an employee. That happens all the time, and and one of the issues that hasn't been addressed here is health coverage. If I'm misclassified as an independent contractor, I'm really an employee, I get hurt. Now I go to the emergency room, don't have insurance, but the emergency room has to see me, has to fix me up, send me back out. Well, guess what? Everyone here that has insurance just picked up a premium for that. These are the things, like I said, that go on in the construction industry that people don't realize, that it affects everybody in any way, shape, or form, taxes, insurance, whatever it may be. But the other thing is that these bills here, the laws are made not to segregate. On a GC, yes, I agree with Mr. Butler to a certain degree that a GC should not be completely liable for a subcontractor or a sub of a sub of a sub. But a GC also controls the job too, just like anything else. He controls the contracts, the subcontracting, the quality of the work. It's his responsibility to make sure that job's safe. So a GC who hires the subs out should have some liability in the factor here. It shouldn't just all be put on the subs, because they are hiring the subs. And if that subs someone out, then he should make sure that if there's a new sub on that job, then he should have his paperwork in line too, just like he should when he does his bid. So the whole thing of this is that we have to look at it, yes, we have to look at it overall, Mr. Butler, I agree with you on that. And we have to make sure that it is put together correctly. But the whole thing of this is to exclude anybody from it, and I was involved in the Act 72 early on, with Representative Lentz when he was involved with it. But the whole thing of it is that once you start excluding things, especially when we're talking about construction here, that's all we're talking about here. Every part of that is integral within itself. So having people on a board that are not just slanted one way or the other, having expertise on it, I applaud you on bringing that up. Okay, but the whole thing of this.
That's recorded, right? That's important for me on that one.
I'm just,
Chairman.
to have all views is always a good thing to do.
True.
Chairman, if I can ask a question on the same thing here, just to follow up, because I want to make sure I understand. because it seems like it's just a contractual issue that could be one line in a contract to your sub, Hank, is what you're saying, that if I'm a sub to your contractor, it has to say, if I'm going to sub out any work and you don't follow these E-Verify rules, I can throw your that seems like a legal issue within that contract. Am I getting that? Because if and it's an education to the contractor. So our job would be to educate them on this law, and it would be the contractor's responsibility to general, the sub of the sub, the sub of the sub, the sub of the sub, to put that language in there that you are responsible for that.
It could be. I mean,
Okay.
it could be in the contracts for the work sites. However, if we are talking about expanding this to private work, because on public work, it's typically a Separations Act issue. So it's a separate prime, it's their issue. But if we are going to broaden this to go to private work too, then we should remove the liability from a contractor or a sub, if the sub or, another is doing it in violation, is going to be penalized. And it's not paranoia, it's just experience. I just want to make sure that the penalties do not far exceed the actual person who's doing the job, who's in violation. And that's what I'm trying to have. So yes, or we could, since we're opening this bill to look at this or this issue, why can't we have it that the contractor or the sub has the right to terminate contracts based on that?
But I mean, basically, Mr. Nielsen, to answer that too. Yeah, I know. The other thing is that the law is going to be, the law that's proposed here today on both issues, like I said, is going to be amended here and there to make changes to it. So that, to answer your question there, to put it into a contractual part of it, yes, a contractor could do that. But the whole thing of it is, and Mr. Butler, to get back to you, you also know that OSHA today now can hold a GC liable for subs violations.
Yes.
Okay? So like I said, everybody has some kind of touching that in the construction industry should have liability in the fact.
When it comes to this, then they should have the right, and it should be, in my opinion, that it should be in legislation, they should have the right to terminate a contract if they're in violation.
And that's the law that we're here today to try to move forward so that we can protect our construction workers, our taxpayers, our constituents, and everything else here. That's what we're trying to do.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. And our next question is Representative Galloway.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Real quick, a couple different points. First, on E-Verify, you had brought up two key points which I thought were relevant. The E-Verify legislation being introduced today is different than current law and what was introduced before, specifically as it relates to penalties. I thought you had a good point as far as first, second, and third offenses. And it also is different in the notification area. And I think those two will be a sticking point going forward. And I hope the maker of the bill and will be open to possibly looking at those type of areas. Also, when it comes to misclassification, I do have to apologize. Most of your remarks, you're just simply looking at this bill in a vacuum. And this bill is not in a vacuum. This bill is part of a package of bills that we're not discussing today. And really, I had no role in that. You're just simply looking at the very first bill in a series of a package of 4 different bills that we've been working on for some 5 years. The bill in general, the objects of these bills is not to reinvent the wheel when it comes to misclassification. The object of the bill is to improve penalties and enforcement. That's what we were looking to do. If somebody wants to open this up and start looking at all kinds of different things and bringing new voices onto the task force, I would be willing to do that. But in the future, if we could look at your comments in as far as an overall holistic package, 4 different bills that we're looking to increase enforcement and penalties. If you want to bring in other people on, other voices on this task force, I'd be more than happy to listen, as long as we focus on the problem that we are currently facing today, which is penalties and enforcement.
And again, I was asked to testify on this issue. I was given 2 bills.
I understand.
When I looked at the bills, my first question was, and I was researching this issue, and you're right, but the issue is, independent contractor misclassification of workers. I view that as two different things. And that's why I'm saying for a clear definition of what we're talking about here. And as for a task force of having us here is the exact reason why you have a hearing, to bring in experts to the table to talk about this. In no way do we support using misclassifying workers, or do we support independent contractors, being used to win work, to underbid and then do change orders to get the bids up there. Absolutely not. But at the same time, we need to protect it from going bigger than what the intent was. And I think bringing experts to the table would not be a bad thing. As maybe not to vote, but just to have, I like them, obviously, but to have them just partake in it and give them their opinions.
Okay. Well, I'd like to again thank everyone at the table there for testifying. It's been some very informative discussions, and I think your comments have really helped us to get a handle on some of the concerns that may arise.
Thank you.
Thanks.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you, John, it was a pleasure meeting you.
Now, we had attempted to invite the U.S. Department of Homeland Security. They operate the E-Verify system. We wanted them to come and explain to us the system and kind of the structural and the process involved, if you will. And so, unfortunately, they're not able to participate in state legislative hearings. So, as an alternative, we reached out to get some employers in here who have a fair amount of experience using E-Verify. We wanted them, again, to explain the processes and the system as they understand it from the user's perspective. And I want to be clear, these individuals are here to testify not as experts or offering opinions on the specific legislation. They are here to offer their testimony in regard to experience that they have had using the E-Verify system. So when we ask questions of them, I would ask that our members be aware of that and limit the questions to the particular experience that these individuals have had, as opposed to them being what I'll call resident experts. With us today, we have Mr. Scott Briggs, who is Vice President of Human Resources and Communications with Naus Foods Cooperative, Inc. Also joining us is Vicki Rauch with, did I say your name right?
Yes.
Great. Thank you, John. Vicki Rauch, who is the Human Resources Manager, also with Naus Foods Cooperative. And I'd ask the two of you if you could be willing to divide the 5-minute opening statement between you as you see fit, and then we'll move on to questions and answers. I will remind you that Shannon Walker will let you know when you have about 30 seconds of the entire 5-minute allotment. Mr. Briggs?
Very good. Good afternoon, Chairman Cox, Chairman Harkins, and members of the committee. My name is Scott Briggs, and I'm the Vice President of Human Resources and Communications for Naus Foods Cooperative, Inc. With me is my colleague, Vicki Rauch, who serves as Human Resources Manager and is well-versed on the day-to-day administration of the E-Verify in the workplace. Thank you for the opportunity to testify today regarding our company's utilization of E-Verify. Established in 1949, Naus Foods is a grower-owned cooperative headquartered in Adams County. As a fruit processor, our products are sold throughout the United States and exported to countries throughout the world. In addition to our branded and private label retail products, we're one of the largest producers of fruit products for the federal food service industry in the United States, and a provider of processed fruit products for the federal government. We have 5 manufacturing facilities located in South Central Pennsylvania and one in Paw Paw, Michigan, with approximately 1,100 employees. While you may not be familiar with the name Naus Foods, we certainly hope you're more familiar with our brand names Musselman's and Lucky Leaf. Historically, we were a very seasonal employer, as we would receive harvested fruit, quickly process it into a can or a jar, and then go about trying to sell it. With advances in fruit storage technology and capabilities over the last 15 to 20 years, we have become a nearly year-round operation, processing our products as well as co-packing for other businesses. We hire throughout the year as necessary, with increased hiring activity in August and September, of each year in order to handle the receipt of harvested apples delivered by our growers. Nouse Foods began using E-Verify system in 2009. In the years preceding, we experienced on a somewhat regular basis the receipt of letters from government agencies advising of Social Security number discrepancies with some of our employees. When investigating these matters and/or confronting our employees with this news, often the result was that the employee ended up no longer working for our company. With the E-Verify system, we felt it would provide a tool, in addition to the review of I-9 forms, to help us ensure that our entire workforce is legally available for employment. Upon being hired, candidates will complete the I-9 form within the first 72 hours of employment, which is then entered via computer portal by our HR offices into the E-Verify system. Once entered and submitted, the system will then verify information for employment authorization within minutes. In the event of a discrepancy, the system will prompt the employer to print a further action notice and present it to the candidate to resolve any discrepancies with the information submitted. If a data entry error would occur, then that case can be closed and a new one created. Discrepancies are infrequent but not uncommon. Employees who are referred to Social Security Administration regarding tentative non-confirmations, or TNCs, may continue to work up to 30 days to resolve the discrepancy, in addition to obtaining documentation from Social Security Administration stating the issue is resolved and the employee is authorized to work. In our experience, the majority of those individuals do not return after being given the further action notice. The E-Verify system is not complicated, and it is pretty user-friendly. It typically takes 5 minutes to enter required information and submit it. The only drawback that we've experienced since implementing the system has been that in the event of a federal government shutdown, the verification process has been slowed or interrupted, thus creating a backlog and delaying the final approval for the employee. We make it known as part of our recruiting and hiring process that we are an E-Verify employer, and thus our observation over the years has been that E-Verify has most likely helped us to filter out employment candidates that would not meet employment eligibility requirements. Thus, they don't come through our doors. As mentioned earlier, it is an additional and for the most part helpful tool for ensuring our employees are legally employable. Thank you for the opportunity to testify, and Vicki and I are happy to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you. We're going to start with Representative Ecker.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I got to thank Nouse Foods for being here, the proud Adams County company that in my district. But I appreciate you coming and sharing this experience that you have with E-Verify and kind of giving us more of an idea how it works in another industry. But along those lines, what would you say has been some of the biggest challenges with the program, with the E-Verify program, other than the government shutdown issues that could arise?
I would have to say that there's been very little issues at all, and Vicki, you can speak if you're familiar with any.
No, I would say very little.
We've actually found it.
Can you use the microphone as you whoever's speaking? You can actually take the other one from over there. They're both live.
I would say, in my mind, as the head of HR, gives me sleep insurance to know that we have a program, we can use it, and we can follow it. In the years since we started in 2019 using E-Verify, I can only think of one time when local government came to see us, law enforcement came to see us about an employee with stolen identity issue. And one of the first things we checked was if we had run the E-Verify, and as soon as we showed that that was the case, we were out of the conversation and law enforcement did what they do.
So, because, you know, when the construction industry is a little large, or some larger companies, some smaller companies, being a larger company, do you see any challenges for a smaller company to operate an E-Verify system?
No, I don't. As a previous small employer, the process is the same for a small employer or a large employer, so I believe it scales perfectly.
Great. Again, thanks for being here. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Chairman Harkins?
Thank you both for your testimony. I also wanted to compliment you on your key lime cream pie filling. It's a must-have. With that said, how often do discrepancies arise when verifying employees, and what is the process used to resolve them? If you could kind of walk us through that.
Very little discrepancies. The few that we have typically are numbers that don't match. Social Security numbers don't match. And that's where the non-confirmation comes into play. No, not very often at all. Maybe a dozen out of 100.
And if you would hit one, what do you generally do then?
We print that non-confirmation action out, and they take that to the Social Security Administration and resolve any issues they might have.
I see. Thank you.
And next we have Representative McKenzie.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to both of you for coming to testify. The previous speakers actually asked my question, so I don't have a question at this point, but I did just want to commend you and Nous Foods for voluntarily taking this action and doing the right thing. So thank you, and thank you again for being here today.
Sure, thank you.
I do have a question. How long have you, and you might have said this and I just missed it, how long have you used the E-Verify system?
Since 2009.
Okay. And so over the 10-year use, have you seen a steady improvement, or is it kind of implemented and stayed the same? What's been your experience with it? When we first put it into place, there were, as Representative Galloway pointed out in his earlier comments, there was a lot of, I'll call them warnings given by people saying, oh, it's going to have all kinds of false negatives. And, so there were a lot of concerns, I think, that were raised. Did you experience, as a system improved over the years, I guess is the better question?
A couple of things. I mentioned what we were experiencing before 2009. I will tell you that we were concerned when we implemented it. We were blessed with good timing, I would say, that we did it in 2009. The economy was not necessarily flourishing at that time. We were concerned that it could preclude us from getting the necessary employment candidates. Implementing it in 2009, though, went very smoothly for us. As I mentioned, we have 6 facilities, so each of our HR offices had to be trained on how to do it within their staffs. But really, once that occurred, there really wasn't a lot of glitches or bumps in the road from day one. And really, it is something that once implemented, it's one of the just say the low maintenance features that goes on in the hiring process. Through the years since 2009, there hasn't been any really big incidents or years where we've regretted having taken this route.
Okay, and system downtime as far as availability of the network, things like that, do you experience issues like that where you go to verify somebody and the system's not working or gives you an error that says come back later?
No, I haven't had any issues with it. I mean, some systems are slow, but that's typically after the shutdown. That's the only time that I've found it to be very slow.
So after the federal shutdown, it was kind of a slow restart of the system?
Well, it's backlogged, so everybody's trying to get on at one
okay.
time, so yep.
Okay, so it was more a temporary overload because
Yes.
it hadn't been in operation prior to that?
Yes.
Okay. And so while the Department of Homeland Security is not able to testify here, we are going to be working with them to try to iron out any kinks in the legislation. If you had anything to offer them directly, is there anything you'd like us to take to them and say, hey, can you improve this, or can you add this feature? Or I know I'm putting you on the spot, but
I don't see any. I think it's rather user-friendly. I mean, the information is, just data entry, click, point, submit.
okay. All right. Well, again, thank you both for taking the time out of your days to come and testify. Are there any other questions for this last panel? All right. With that, I'll call the meeting to a close, and thank you again.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.